Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is Land Use Evaluation. Today's instructor is Amy Wilson. Today is also Tuesday, January 21st. My name is Alyssa Atkins, and today I will be your webinar facilitator. I am the Training and Development Coordinator for the Natives Learning Center. A quick disclaimer before we get started. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. You can access today's presentation slides available for download, as well as the rest of the webinar materials in the course page over on the right-hand side on the red bar where it says courses. If you click that, it'll take you directly to the course where you can find all of the presentation materials there. It is also over in the public chat box as well. How to join a live webinar. When you log in, all you have to do is click that green banner at the top and it'll take you straight into the webinar immediately. Once you register, you only have to register once. You can just log in and click the green banner. Once you log in, it will ask you to be speaker listen. Please select listen only. Please always select listen only to avoid any audio feedback during today's webinar. If you wish to change the speaker you are hearing the webinar audio from, please click the phone icon. Will bring up a list of your speaker/mic devices so you can select the one you prefer. If you have any issues, please put your tech issues in the chat box and I will help you to the best ability that I can. If you would like to send a question or have any questions at all, please put them in the chat box. I will be more than happy to let Amy know when you have a question. She'd be more happy to answer them as soon as they pop up. So please don't be afraid to put your questions in there. As we get started, let's introduce ourselves in the chat. Please take a moment and send into the chat your name, where you're joining us from, your work role in Indian country, and your tribal affiliation, please. A final note, please do not click the red side. That bar that's all lit up on red, please do not click it. If you click it, it will take you out. If it takes you out, have no fear. Log back in and click that green banner and it'll take you right back to here. And with that said, it is a pleasure that I now hand it off to Amy Wilson.
Thank you, Esther. I appreciate that. And thank you all for being here. Please, if you have any questions, just feel free to stop me at any time, and I appreciate your time. So today's webinar is on, oops, I just pressed the wrong button. Sorry. Let's see. Okay. Today's webinar is on land use evaluation. And my name is Amy Wilson. I have 15 years of experience working in land use and economic development, energy and natural resources in different roles and different organizations from, tribal, state, and federal. I think, oh, good. I can use my inner. So today's learning objectives include to understand the key differences between land use types, to recognize key features of land use regulations, to be clear on land use evaluation methods, and then to identify how land use regulations and plans influence beneficial land use patterns. So that fourth concept we'll spend more time on than probably the other areas, but I'll start out with just kind of an overview of land, land background, then we'll get into land use classifications and then really spend time with land use patterns and landscape and regulations. So I'm going to start off really basic. My intention is not to offend your intelligence by any way by starting out basic. It's just kind of my style. I like to start out just basics so we can all get in the same headspace and then go forward. So just so you know, I know you all know what land is, so I don't want to try to offend you. But we'll, just start out basic and just kind of go from there. But, and I think too, we do know what land is, but we don't really take time to like think about what it is. So I think it's good to step back and kind of think about land as in what it is, as this kind of physical material of the Earth's crust. Everything below our feet. It also refers to the natural resources within the land, including, your rivers, your lakes, and the biosphere. So your vegetation and wildlife, soil and climate are all part of the land. Land cover refers to what's physically, covering that land crust. So grasslands, forests, desert, tundra, freshwater, shrublands, wetlands, polar ice caps, and urban. So I think often we don't really think of urban as a land cover, but it is. It's a landscape and it's a land cover. And we'll get into that later on in the presentation. But these land covers result in this kind of these different aspects of how we use the land, including physical, the natural features, the built environment, and the social aspects of that land. So your landscape is spatially organized into these like physical characteristics or urban landforms. You have geology and terrain, water supply, the geographic location is included in that. In the natural sphere, we have this, living and non-living things that are occurring naturally within the environment. Wildlife, energy resources. In our built environment, we have areas of settlement that allow us to have, habitat, places to live, jobs and schools, education, and means of transportation or connectivity through roadways, railways, and other infrastructure. And then the social aspect that land provides, this the human element, which is, your economy and your places of worship and government facilities, health facilities, recreation areas. So, land really allows us all of these things. It is critical for human survival, for subsistence, shelter, economy, and identity and culture. And as Native Americans, I think you all know better than any of us that deep connection to land. Land is it's a form of material wealth, right? It holds the resources of the planet that are considered, wealth. So your silver, lead, oil, gas, potash, which is what we have in New Mexico, coal and woody material. And as I was putting this presentation together, I was thinking about when I was in college, I took this class material, or it was like, what was it? Philosophy of land use or something weird like that. But what came out of that, and I'll never forget it, is, thinking about the resources that we have as a check in the bank. And they really are. So, your oil and your natural gas and your coal and potash, all of those are really, they are a check in the bank. So as we deplete those, we're depleting our capital. And I do think it's an important way to look at that. Land is important for its ecosystem services, which, really refers to the ways that the earth mitigates climate change. It regulates, water supply through watersheds, drainage basins, food systems. All of those are economic or ecosystem services. It also refers to this kind of transfer of energy, right? And transfer of goods and services, and how those are really divided through your social, your economic and environmental kind of areas. In terms of climate, land is really has a huge impact, obviously, on climate through elevation and latitude, topography, reflectivity, and land uses all have effects on that. So when we're considering, land use evaluation, considering any sort of development, there's, a large impact, obviously, with climate that goes along with that. Land consumption or land conversion is another huge aspect that is related to climate. So when we're converting land from its natural state into lands that support human development, we're disrupting the soil and we're disrupting the Earth's ability to take in the negative effects that we I guess cause the system. So land use is also considered, as I said before, land use is considered a layer of the land, right? When I said urban development is a form of landscape, it's a layer on top of the land. That's a distinctive, very distinctive physical layer of the Earth's surface, right? Agriculture, mining, housing, roadways, those are considered land use, and they're considered a feature, a physical feature on top of the Earth's crust. So as land is developed with buildings, roadways, and other improvements, that land then becomes to what we call real estate. Those elements, those improvements, are incorporated into that parcel, and they become part of that parcel. So with land use, I like this table. I originally had put this table together for a plan I did a long time ago, and it just helps to kind of understand land use and its different utilities and its different values. So if you think about land use as kind of, compartmentalize, if you, I guess is a way to say it, but to divide it into direct use, non-use, and use of, I think is a good way to, I guess, kind of think about it and to think how we use that. In terms of direct use, land use, we're talking about consumptive uses, passive uses, and indirect uses. So consumptive uses is that the most direct, form of use. So we're talking urban development, deforestation, or agriculture, or deforestation for agriculture and mining operations. So this is where, resources are extracted, and we're, for direct utilization of that land, like non-discriminatory, or just like using that land. Passive is more, you're still using it, but it's a low impact use. So it's usually when you're talking about passive land use, or passive land use, you're usually referring to like this really low intensive recreation or culture activities that don't really disrupt the land. You're not like completely conserving it because you're still out there like impacting it in some way, but you're just lightly impacting it. And then an indirect use is where you're using resources for their Earth benefit. So you're thinking about like carbon sequestration. So using seaweed as a tool for cleaning the environment, for enhancing Earth health, and or non-till methods. Those are also a form of indirect land use, indirect use. Non-use is not, well, just what it says, not using it, either conserving it in perpetuity, or for a long period of time, or conserving it for future use. It's your check in the bank, so to speak, that future use. We're not going to use it now, and we may not use it in the near future, but it's there. And the longer that we keep it, the longer that capital stays with us. So, we're talking water storage, oil and natural gas, minerals, any of that. It's this like kind of future option value. Conservation, same, you're conserving that land for cultural uses, grasslands, waterways, whatever it is, and it is distinct from that direct use category off to the left side of the screen. And then use of is this where we physically sink our pollution into the earth. This is done through community landfills, ocean pollution, and then emissions release. So, we're sinking our pollution into the earth, and that really refers to that use of category. So further looking at land classifications, again, kind of staying with that social and that economic and environmental theme where these are compartmentalized, but they're overlapping, right? Land classifications are used to really, look at residential uses, looking at public uses, community services, government, health, cultural uses. Lands are used for, production, and then that natural resource or that ecological earth health kind of component. So these are all, forms of land classification. Now, land value is, the utility of land for human use is really determines its value in a lot of ways. It determines its value where things are located, right? Where you're locating certain types of uses in certain areas because of their value or their utility for that use, to afford a certain use. And that gets into land quality. So land quality is defined as this complex attribute of land which acts in a manner distinct from the actions of other land qualities in its influence on the suitability of a land for a specific kind of use. So again, does it afford a certain kind of a use? Does it allow for, residential use, commercial use, or even cultural spaces, right? Like, does it have the land qualities necessary? Was it your traditional lands? Does it have, there's all sorts of factors.
Amy, ooh, it looks like we lost Amy. I do apologize for the technical difficulty. She's going to jump right back on in a couple of seconds. There she is.
Hi, goodness, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I don't know, I just totally lost my internet all of a sudden. I apologize for that. I thought, well, maybe they cut me off. They were tired of listening to me. So, no, but you're still here. Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so we'll continue. And I don't know, somehow I picked up a pen along the way. Not sure oh, goodness. I didn't know you could draw. That's exciting. Okay, so hopefully I won't draw all over everything. So did you hear me discuss the land quality definition before I got kicked off?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm going to just go on. So I guess in going on with that, land qualities and kind of thinking about that, land qualities needed to support human activity include land suitability, land capability, land compatibility and land harmony, physical capital, political will, and that's expressed through zoning and other land use controls, demand. So this is something that I think is really important, this demand aspect, because in order to have afford land development, in order to be able to facilitate that, you have to have availability. So you hear people all the time saying, oh yeah, we need shovel-ready lots, or we need housing. There's a demand for that, but you can't meet that without the lot availability. So if you don't make that available, those spaces available, that development can't happen. So, we need to be able to facilitate that type of development or facilitate those qualities necessary to allow these, types of development to happen or not to happen. And then the human capital available to support land use activities. So, workforce pipeline is a huge part of that. But again, getting back to these qualities needed. So really, it gets at land location, topography, access, siting, and compaction. The capability of that land to actually support a facility without degrading the environmental aspects of it, without impacting human health and safety, and without putting an overburden on public facilities and services. So, when you're doing a land use evaluation, you really, for whatever it is, for whatever type of use it is, you really do need to look at the land suitability and land capability associated with that land, which, really encompasses the land qualities. And then, the political will is another kind of big component of that, right? And then the demand and financial capital. So just as examples, so residential land quality that you likely want to be looking for is lot location and size, topography and access. And this includes if you're just building, one house or placing a mobile home on one lot, or if you're a developer, a housing authority looking at large parcels of land. You're looking for land improvements such as utilities, roadways, and then the stability of that ground. Are you in wetlands or is it stable, compact land? These are all land qualities. And then for land use or for residential, compatibility demonstrated through proximity to, work and school and facilities such as shopping and government services. Those are going to be desirable land qualities for residential development. So again, if you're doing a land use evaluation, that would be in your report, right? Whether or not those features are present. Commercial land qualities, examples for, because now we have like brick and mortar establishments and we have like e-commerce establishments. So they're going to have different requirements for land qualities, right? So brick and mortar establishments, again, they're looking at land availability, location, lot size, topography, and access. Some places may demand high visibility, and some places may not demand high visibility, but they need parking. So those are all land qualities. Land improvements, again, your utilities, roads, does the soil allow for development? Sufficient parking and circulation. And then compatibility demonstrated through proximity to customers and other services. So where your residential compatibility was, close to schools and shopping and all of that, the commercial compatibility will be proximity to their customers. Then e-commerce, they're going to likely want to be by transportation routes, warehousing, parcel delivery services. They're definitely going to want to be in an area with reliable broadband, power services, and then again, proximity to parcel delivery services. I have that twice because it's so important for e-commerce. But no, these are really, important things to think about when you're evaluating land for these different types of uses. So for public land quality, like for educational facilities and health facilities, they're still going to have, still going to be looking at lands with, based on availability and location and size, but they're also going to be really concerned with proximity to students, parents, educators, employees, and for schools, outdoor learning opportunities, access to open and conservation space and preserved lands, to be able to utilize those lands to demonstrate, to do, like pilot projects and to demonstrate to their students, like demonstration type projects. And then also convenience, to safe routes for accessing by bicycle and walking. You know, those will be those are top land qualities that you'll want to look at for educational facilities, and the same with health facilities. You want to be able to, you know, facilitate safe walking and crossing of sidewalks, and then compatibility to, you know, patients and providers and other supporting industries like, you know, pharmacies and whatnot. And it, you know, and I think it does seem straightforward, but it is, you know, really important to consider these land qualities when you are looking at doing land use evaluation. So different methods for land use evaluation include just, you know, a site survey. So where you're like physically, you know, observing the land, looking at the land for physical factors that determine whether or not a certain land use can be used in that area, and just its overall desirability for that land use. Aerial photography is really a great way to evaluate lands. Satellite-based, you know, remote sensing like GIS, and then archival review. So looking at parcel maps, other legal maps, site plans, and reports, and also, you know, any sort of formally, you know, adopted regulation and planning documents. When you're evaluating any lands, you want to get, you know, all the information you can on those lands. So those would be, you know, the sources of information that you'll want to seek out. So I'm going to kind of go through those now, each of those areas. So for land use types or land use classification, there's like 3 different, I guess, tools that you can look at to formally do a land evaluation. And that includes, the one that you're probably most familiar with actually is this first one, this United States Geological Survey one of the land cover classification system. There's this Millennium Ecosystem Assessment that was done by the United Nations. And then this land-based classification standards that was developed through the American Planning Association. And whether or not you're aware of it, you're probably aware of that classification system, because it's the most commonly associated with like zoning. Even if your community doesn't have zoning, you're likely aware of that form of classification. So for the USGS, they classify lands into open water, perennial ice and snow, developed and open space, developed and low intensity. So again, kind of like that passive use, developed high intensity. So you're really looking at that consumptive, like heavy consumptive use. Barren land, deciduous forest, evergreen forest, mixed forest, shrub and scrub, grasslands and herbaceous lands, pasture and hay, cultivated and woody wetlands, and then emergency wetlands. That doesn't even sound right. I'm not sure. So, but this map, I'm sure you're aware of this map. So the other system is through this one, this United Nations classification system that I had mentioned. They separate land use types into marine, coastal, inland water, forest, dryland, inland, or island, sorry, not inland, mountain, polar, cultivated, and urban again. And I do like that they have these like supporting services and the regulating services, meaning like these like ecosystem services, the climate regulation, disease regulation, water regulation, and water purification. And then the provisioning services really get at your kind of the economic component of land, and then excuse me, cultural services. So they go deeper, I'm sorry, into like pardon me, into classifying the land. And then this one is the one that you're probably familiar with. This was the one that's developed by the American Planning Association. And they divide lands into activity, function, structure, site, and ownership. So, the actual use of the land based on its observable characteristics, the economic function of those lands, the type of structure that's allowed on those lands and that's suitable for those lands. So again, looking at that land quality. And then site, the overall physical development or character of the land, and then ownership. So this, and if you're like interested in it, I would look at the, you can just like even Google it, that LBCS, or the land-based classification system, and it'll come up. It gets like really, I think, or really complicated really quickly, but these colors, and then when I say you're likely familiar with it, because these colors automatically are associated with zoning map colors. So all of this is related to zoning maps and zoning codes, and it like goes down into levels. I mean, it gets really deep. So you can see like for every level with function, now you're going off of your activity, and then every land use, they have a function associated with that activity, and then the structure. So it just kind of gets more and more detailed as you go on. And then site. But it is a good way to, kind of look at lands in terms of land use valuation to kind of see where you're at with what type of land it is and the suitability for it. And I actually didn't even know that in this system that they had a section for tribal lands, which I thought was interesting. I didn't know that. And when I was putting this presentation together, I wanted to include the system in there. So anyway, I thought that was really interesting, and I didn't actually know that from all the years that I've been using it. So landscape, let's see if I can go back. So this spatial analysis is the second component of land evaluation. And I think spatial analysis is really important. It gets at this kind of concept of the way that everything kind of fits together and starts forming a pattern in the landscape. The way that patterns of land use, patterns of housing, patterns of industrial uses, patterns of agricultural uses, these form a landscape pattern that show this like relationship between where we live, work, shop, recreate, worship, like all of these things. There's a pattern there, whether or not there's a land use regulation making sure that certain land uses happen or don't happen. I'm sorry, I have a runny nose, but whether or not there's regulations for that, a land pattern emerges. So I think that's important to understand. A lot of communities are like, oh, we don't want to zone. Well, even if you don't zone, a land use pattern is going to emerge, and you would rather that be beneficial, where you're optimizing relationships, optimizing land uses, and minimizing degradation. But we can look at land use patterns as part of that is this idea of urban form, density, grain, and connectivity. So urban form, again, we've talked about that, or I've talked about that a lot, but it really refers to this physical characteristics of built up areas, including scale. So, dang, I am so sorry. I don't know why why I keep getting kicked off.
It's okay. It might be that the screen is timing out, maybe.
Oh, maybe, I don't know. I'm touching it. I really apologize though. Or how do I keep it from doing that? I wonder.
I would just randomly click the screen.
Okay.
I would randomly just like click it to make sure.
Okay. Gosh, I'm sorry, guys. But yeah, so the land use, patterns, the urban form really does get at that, even because we think about urban areas like, a city, and signs of urbanization, we think about like cities, but it happens in small towns too, right? We have urban aspects of our communities. So looking at that development and how that's kind of happening. Density gets at this ratio of population or jobs to an area size. So if you have a large area size and a small population, it's obviously not very densely populated. Whereas if you have, whether it's a large or a small area and a large population, that's going to be more densely populated. So that's what that density refers to. The grain refers to the diversity of functional land uses. So, if you have all residential or all, commercial development, you're not going to have that. You're not going to have like high grain. Whereas if you have like a diverse landscape and with all sorts of different types of development, you're going to have that high diversity or that high grain in your landscape. And then connectivity gets to the modes of circulation. So that includes rail, transportation, air, all of those things. And then, so when we're thinking about the landscape and land use, just land use evaluation, it's really important to know that these relationships perform or create like land use benefits, right? So the spatial organization of these lands, how we interact with our land and resources, energy consumption and availability, infrastructure needs, capital costs and maintenance required for those systems, access to housing and education, how we use the land and then the associated like landscape patterns that come out of that can create really beneficial relationships. And likewise, they can kind of create these like detrimental relationships and even compromise public health and safety, depending on how and where things are located. So if we're looking at land use benefits from like a landscape perspective, these are some of those benefits, right? So this social, obviously, land about allowing us a place to live. Those are social benefits, employment security. Land provides these places to learn and to work together. It's a huge benefit, big social benefit that these lands provide. Economic benefits. Again, everything from food to energy and to services like retail services. And then environmental benefits, again getting back to those like ecological services that the earth provides, through pollination and diversity and soil retention. And us as humans, we obviously can help or make it worse. So this is a table, and I know you can't read it, but it shows this interrelationship between and among land use benefits. So it is scientifically proven that these relationships between land uses really do produce benefits. So I think it gives extra reason to be more thoughtful about how we are planning our communities and our lands, and really trying to decide how to develop, because there are benefits that we can enjoy because of beneficial land use patterns. So in terms of the legal environment of land use. I'm going to talk about what's called free market land use, policy land use, and land use code and comprehensive, the land use code and comprehensive land use plan. I'm afraid it's going to like click out, so I wanted to go back to the little screen for a minute, which you guys can't see on your slide. Sorry. Okay, so here we go. So legal environment. Free market land use is referred to this where land use decisions are primarily made by private individuals and groups. And this is what I see by and large. You know, I work exclusively in Indian country and have for over 10 years now. And this is by and large what I see is this idea of free market land use where, you know, there really is no land use regulations. And it's just kind of like develops over time, right? Your patterns develop over time. Policy land use refers to this zoning without a land use plan. But in some cases, it refers to, you know, you can also have a zoning ordinance there too. And by the way, and I'll get into this in a minute, but you know, your like official zoning map is to the extent you have a land use plan and an official zoning code, you know, your land use map is that enforcing mechanism. Without a zoning map, you can't enforce your zoning code or your land use plan. And that, you know, I've seen it a lot too, where they're like, oh, we have a land use code or a zoning code, but they don't have a zoning map. So you can't enforce that, right? And the same with a land use plan. So, and then land use code and comprehensive plan, these refer to these legislative actions that are taken by a government to enforce land uses and guide future development. So this free market land use, it's a system where the allocation and development of land is primarily determined by market forces with minimal government intervention, allowing owners to really decide how to use their property based on supply and demand. You know, usually it's based on supply and demand, the concept is. So these are areas where, you know, you have minimal to no zoning, and then unregulated land can lead to incompatible uses, environmental damage, traffic degradation. There are examples of cities with minimal land use regulations. Houston's like the go-to. That's what you always know is like when you're trying to give an example of a city that doesn't zone. Houston's the city. Las Vegas, Phoenix, they have minimal standards as well in terms of like cities. So in absence of a zoning code, government codes related to housing, agriculture, grazing, commercial development, protecting land resource or natural resources, preserving cultural areas, and other like environmental concerns, those can act as zoning in a weird like kind of way. So an example is the Hoopa tribe, and I bring them up because I've worked with them in the past and I'm working now with them on 2 other projects. But they're a prime example of a tribe that doesn't have a quote unquote zoning code. But if you look at their codes really deeply, they have a lot of regulations that really, in a way, act like zoning, right? They have setbacks, rules for property lines, for riparian areas and other land uses. They have codes that delineate, you know, wellhead production and have these like overlay zones, and they have cultural areas. So, you know, they have aspects of their code that you can use to lean on, you know, to protect and to kind of guide development one way or the other. So land use regulations refer to this like set of rules that are established by your local government, and they usually include, you know, your density setbacks, what's permitted and what's not. Those are also referred to as land use controls. People don't like that term. I don't really know why. Maybe it's the control that they don't like. I'm not sure. I like land use controls. I like the term land use controls because it's all encompassing. And it includes, you know, your zoning, your map, your land use plan, all of that. And then the overall goal is to just, ensure community health and safety, number one, but also to optimize those benefits between the social, economic, environmental kind of sectors, of the land, to really optimize that and to help guide it the way that you want that to happen. So I'm just going to get into this last part of the session. I want to focus on zoning and land use planning, and really kind of get into that. So, what is zoning and how does it work? Zoning includes your, use regulations, or it includes use and then development and regulations. So how you use the land, where you're allowed to develop it, and then the regulations around that. So a zoning district is this political territory, which zoning regulations and standards are uniform, but you can have different forms of zoning. Like this is what we call Euclidean zoning. It's just these kind of straight zones where you have a section or an area with multi-family, single family, commercial, and industrial, like very separate. That's what we refer to as Euclidean zoning. If you've heard of that, it's how it came, the name came to be is it was a lawsuit between the village of Euclid and Amber Realty back in like the early 1900s. And, that's where Euclidean zoning came from. But now we have, different types of zoning, and overlay zones really help to ensure that there is diversity in those different zones. Because we do know that, having economic nodes in residential areas is beneficial for everyone, so we know that. So being able to like figure out how to facilitate that and make that happen in a safe and productive way is the overall goal of these land use regulations or controls. The land use districts, are again this way to ensure that development is in conformance with certain standards, that it protects public health, safety, and welfare. So, residential districts usually include your single family, multifamily, mobile home. You have commercial districts that are usually divided into like light commercial and heavy commercial. You have industrial districts, light industrial and heavy industrial, again, trying to kind of like protect, public health, keep things separate where you need to. You usually have a public facilities zoning district, and that includes like your government buildings, your health centers, your elder centers, places like that. Open space districts and like trails, those will be usually zoned. And then you have these planned unit development districts. Not every jurisdiction has these, and they are good in that they are like their own little zoning district all in themselves, right? So if you have a public planned unit development district, essentially the local government is going to pass a resolution ordinance to adopt that planned unit development district, allowing for whatever developments on that site plan, the intensity, the uses, and they're allowing for that development to happen within, the area wherever the legal boundary of that land is. So they are really beneficial in helping to make land uses compatible while also being flexible to allow for like more multi-use type development. And then also with planned unit developments, it gives you, as a government, it gives you more control to like assess fees and development fees and exactions, things like that you would be assessing just to the developer for that planned unit development, that you wouldn't necessarily be assessing to other landholders in that area. So use regulations are these categories that outline, what's suitable or what's allowable a use by right allowable within that area. So, you know, your building and your other structure, how it's arranged, and what activity it can be, you know, residential, can it be a home occupancy activity? Like, you know, what is allowable in that area? That's kind of what we talk about as a use type regulation. I keep pushing the wrong buttons. I think I'd be used to this by now. Intensity regulations really get at the, it kind of goes back to that density, you know, earlier in the session when we were talking about landscape. Intensity is correlated with density, but it looks at, you know, height and setbacks, parking and ingress and egress, open space, you know, landscape featuring, landscape features, fencing, lighting, things like that, and then appropriate drainage. And those will be under, you know, in your zoning code or your zoning regulation, you'll have like intensity regulations built into that. So like if you have a residential code, it'll likely, I mean, not always, we've seen lots of different things, but, you know, usually it'll have, you know, houses have to be set back such, you know, so far from the curb. They can only be so many stories. You know, they have to be at least X amount of square feet, or they can't be any higher than X amount of square feet. You know, that really gets at the intensity component of that regulation. So overlay zones are a way to help to diversify land use within certain areas, and they're also a way to ensure that you protect land uses within certain zones. So, you know, you're just kind of blanketing overlay, like, or, you know, blanket zone of commercial or residential or whatever, but in that area you have pockets that are valuable for protecting for, you know, environmental reasons and for cultural reasons or whatever. And viewshed protection. You know, if you put overlay zones within those certain areas, then you're adding like another kind of layer of restriction, or, you know, even you can have like an economic overlay zone. So you're allowing for additional types of development that aren't allowable in that like underlying regulations. So it's a way to more tailor these land use regulations to your needs. And again, you know, with the Hoopa example, you know, they don't have a zoning code, but they do have an overlay zone. They have it's not, I can't remember, it's not a wetlands overlay zone, but it's an overlay zone associated with their water and watersheds. So, you know, that's again an example, and it's not like in their zoning code, but it's in their like environmental code, I think. So, you know, that's just a way to, you know, kind of know that these things are being incorporated, or to understand that they can be incorporated even without having a, you know, a zoning ordinance or a zoning code. So, you know, your zoning ordinance will include general provisions, it'll include general regulations, it'll include your zoning districts, and then it should have a section that discusses administration and enforcement. So these the general provisions section of your zoning ordinance should discuss the authority and jurisdiction of that zoning code, including any delegated authorities to carry out the planning and zoning activities, such as those delegated to like a land commission, a realty department, or planning department. This is what I see a lot. You know, I see a lot of tribes that, to the extent they have a zoning code, it was like clearly not developed for them. It was like this cut and paste from I don't know where, whoever they hired, like, you know, so it's just like, it's not meant for them, which is partly why they don't use it, because it's like, it doesn't really apply. And then, you know, it lacks the delegated authority component. Like, so it makes it really hard to enforce when you don't know what department's supposed to be doing what, right? Or what committee. So that is one thing that I see a lot with the zoning codes that I've seen. And then, so a zoning ordinance should also include a definition section, and then it should include an appeal process. And this is something I have never actually seen in any of the zoning codes I've looked at for tribes, is this appeal process, but it should be included in there. And then let's see, so your general regulations, again, that planned unit development, to the extent that you allow for planned unit developments, you should have a section in your zoning ordinance that discusses planned unit developments, what the process is for reviewing and approving those, what the requirements are. And then, of course, whatever planned unit development that you actually approve will be its own little, like, kind of its own little ordinance, so to speak, that they have to respond to within that separate zone. But your zoning ordinance should at least kind of lay out the foundational aspects of how that works in the beginning. Your zoning ordinance, under the general regulations, any overlay zones you have, it's going to it should outline those and describe them and describe the allowable uses and the intent of those zones. Any design standards, so if you have like facade requirements, like a quarter of the streetscape has to have xeriscape, or or the building has to be in brick, or like whatever, all of those design standards would be included in that general regulation component of your ordinance. And then the actual zoning districts, so you're going to have the permitted uses, which are also referred to as use by right. And those are, usually your like residential, commercial, industrial. You're going to have certain uses that are allowable by right in there, and it's going to probably list those uses or list similar uses within each of those zoning districts. And that can be I can never say this word. I hate this word. Hierarchical. Ugh, I can't say that word. You know what I'm trying to say. But, your zoning code may be that. Like if you allow, certain uses within the commercial zone, everything in zones that are less intensity, like residential, would be allowed in that too, right? So it just kind of like falls under that. Or they could be just separate, straight zoning, but your zoning ordinance should clearly explain that and state that. And then the zoning district section of your zoning ordinance, and when I say zoning ordinance, I'm talking about like the paper, version of your zoning code. That should have a section that discusses conditional uses. These are also uses that would be allowed in a certain area under certain conditions. And then that would be an agreement between the land, owner, if it's a land, assignment or lease, agreement between that individual and the government, the tribal government, that these are conditional land uses that you're allowing for those special land uses to occur under given conditions. And then that zoning district will also include the height, lot size, setbacks, and parking. So again, getting to that intensity, right? You're able to, you're regulating how many people are within an area, the people to land area ratio, so to speak, and what that looks like. And again, that produces, land use patterns. So then your zoning ordinance will also have an administration and enforcement section, or it should, and that includes this process for development reviews. So like, if you have a person that wants to develop their property, they will come to you and have, you need to incorporate that into your zoning ordinance. Are they going to have a site plan? What does that look like? Who are they going to meet with first? Do they first meet with staff, and then staff makes a recommendation to the planning commission, and then planning commission makes a recommendation to council for approval, like what does all that look like? That's going to be included in that administrative enforcement section of your zoning code. Zoning map. So again, this is the text version of your zoning ordinance. So, it's like the written format, but it's going to discuss the zoning map, and its I guess applicability. Whether, is this a binding map? Like if you are a landowner or, a assignee and you want to propose something that's out of the character of that zoning district, do you have to go before council and ask for a complete zone change or like what? So it's going to outline all of that within the zoning ordinance, or how often, the zoning map has to be updated and what triggers that. Like that should all be explained in your zoning ordinance. And then again, this Board of Adjustment / appeal process, there really should be some sort of appeal process built in to this. And usually you would make appeals to a Board of Adjustment who is also usually your planning commission or land commission. They're just like wearing a separate hat, right? You're kind of like taking one hat off and putting another one on to be able to hear these appeals. If someone is, denied a certain, land use for whatever reason, it would go through that process. These are examples of zoning maps. I just pulled them from wherever. I don't, even know where these places are. I don't work with these tribes, or they're not even tribes. These are like communities, but I just giving you an example of a zoning map, and they can be like as complicated. And I think I have one like later in this slide deck of a community I work with, and it's just very simple. Like, so these can be like as complicated or as simple as you want. Like, they need to be, the zoning code needs to be something you can implement. It needs to be tailored to you. Copying, something from some municipality or a different tribe is not going to work for you. Those aren't going to be used. So, these need to be tailored to you, and they need to be whatever is, whatever you're able to enforce. So there, it just can be, very simple, and it should be. It shouldn't be overly complicated by any means, because then you're not going to use it, and it's just going to frustrate the heck out of people. The people that are trying to follow the land use code, and they're going to be like, well, why isn't my neighbor, why does he have cows when I can't have cows? So it just needs to be simple and something that you can enforce and explain to the people in your jurisdiction. So a comprehensive land use plan is developed pursuant to a tribal law and used by the government to manage and regulate development within their jurisdiction. So I have tribal law here, and obviously because I work with tribes, but I do want you to be clear that, and I'm sure you already are, but just in case you're not, that counties are, typically, depending on the state, a county and a municipality are always required to have a land use plan. So, I think it's really important to be aware of those, even though they're outside your jurisdiction. Be aware of those, be aware of what's going on and how their land use decisions are affecting you, and make sure that you're present, when they're making an approval that affects you directly or indirectly. So in order to do that, you need to be really aware of their comprehensive plan and their land use codes, so you're kind of studied up, so to speak. But you should be aware of those jurisdictions and what they're doing. But this is really, a comprehensive land use plan is this long-term policy document that outlines your community's vision for the future development, how you want lands to be developed, It will discuss zoning and infrastructure placement, housing, growth, environmental considerations. And again, you're not a city, you're not a municipality that's required under state law to develop a land use plan in a certain way. These plans should be, tailored to you. They should meet your needs, and they should be customized to your unique needs, but also something that you can use to demonstrate to outside people when you need to exercise political sovereignty and exercise rights over current lands and over traditional lands that are maybe outside your existing boundary, but that you want to reacquire. Like these plans can be really, really powerful if done right. So, make sure to consider all of that as you're, developing or updating your existing plans. These plans can be binding, or they can be advisory, or they can kind of be a hybrid of both. And what I mean by binding is like it's a hard and fast rule. If it's not listed in that comprehensive plan and it's a binding document, then you're going to have to amend it. So I think kind of a hybrid is good, or it's an advisory document, like this is how we'd like to see land use happen, and you kind of have guardrails, but that if conditions change, you're not forced to have to, amend everything, but that there's strong enough guardrails that, it's clearly worth having a document and a code in place. And government services, they should give a clear, oh shoot, did I lose you guys again?
Right here, Amy, it like cut out for a second.
I don't know what the heck. Okay, at least I didn't lose you. Okay.
Yeah, we're still here. We're here.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. So these plans should thoughtfully consider your past, current, and future or desired conditions. So a lot of times when I'm developing these plans, like I'll go through deeply like all of the plans that the tribe has in place, even if they don't have very many, and a lot of times tribes don't have very many plans, but I'll go through all of those, go through the reports, do a ton of interviews, and work with tribal members and work with elders to really understand like kind of the process of that land and how that landscape developed, and incorporate that into your comprehensive plans. And that's part of your considerations as you're developing your guidelines for future development. And then the goals that support, you should incorporate goals that support all segments of the human environment to some extent. And also obviously with cultural environment, like, that all needs to be included in whatever way that you and your community see fit, and that'll come through kind of like this overall just agreement and direction. And that's usually not that hard to find, like this idea of just commonality, trying to find the common goals. And somehow I've lost the like thing to be able to make the presentation go forward. I'm really having difficulties. Oh, there. Gosh, guys, I apologize. Oh, shoot. Still have my training wheels on. Sorry. Okay. So, land use plan. Now I want to kind of get into what the elements of the land use plan are. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to stop me, since I've stopped a million times on my own. But yeah, so these next slides, I'm going to just go through kind of like the typical elements of a land use plan. And those will include your vision and goals, policy, demographics, housing, economy, land use, meaning like what is the current land use patterns, what kinds of development, is taking place, and what does that look like. It'll go into natural and cultural resources. And I think, this cultural resources is it's an important topic, and can be hard, right? Because a lot of times these are confidential areas, these are confidential practices. You don't want to advertise this, right? So, it's figuring out, what to include, what not to include, and doing that respectfully. On my part, like, it's always, working really closely with the cultural groups, with the tribal planning staff, with the members, because you're like doing this whole dance, right? You're trying to figure out what to include, but also to be respectful to those traditions and those places, because you don't want it to be like kind of open common knowledge. So to make sure that these are tailored to you, and where you're comfortable in that, right? That this is like something that's vetted through a lot of different groups within your community before it's actually decided on what's included and what's not. So yeah, that cultural resources, I just wanted to bring that up. And then services and facilities, your open space and recreation will probably have its own section. Transportation, and more and more this disaster mitigation. I have been including this section in plans for a long time, and it's more and increasingly important. And these plans are pivotal or crucial in helping to form or shape the development of land uses within your community, but they're also really important for justifying funding requests and for making other, decisions. So, thinking about that as you're developing these plans is really important. The goals and policy element, this will be kind of like a generalized statement of policy and how you intend or expect land to develop. Those objectives will be these more precise. They're more precise than planning goals, and they'll provide kind of a basis for a more detailed set of planning policies. And that policy statement is where and under what conditions you'll be able to carry out those objectives, and like kind of who's going to be responsible for that. And again, that section, these sections will look different for every community. Again, making sure that they're unique to you and to your needs, something that you can use now but also grow into, is important. So the land use element will just focus on the entire planning area, and then any sub areas individually and together. So again, with tribes, I've done a lot of different plans in a lot of different ways. Where we have like, okay, this is our boundary within our reservation, this is our planning area, but we're going to focus on all of that. But then we're also focusing on these areas of priority for housing or whatever. So we're going to have kind of like sub area plans for that. And then we're going to include our traditional lands that we've lost but we want to reacquire. We're going to include that because that's important to our community and our goals and our culture and our traditions. So we're going to include that in this plan. And also that's going to justify and help us to show like, yeah, those were our lands and we want them back, and it's on our plan. We've always wanted them back. And like, you're able to put that in a formal document to leverage to outside people that will understand that, and be able to see that in a different way, I guess. And that will help to get what you want at the end of the day. It really does. So, your that land use element again, should be designed based on your needs. And then it should contain, if there's any inconsistencies in your current land uses or zoning areas or whatever, that should be included in that section, a description of that. Your demographics element will go into historical and current population, on reservation and off reservation membership, age distributions, your sex ratio, household types, educational attainment, like all of that good stuff. If you put it in there right, it'll be really easy for your grant writers and staff to be able to just go through and like pull that information whenever they're doing their reports for other things. So this, if done right, you can just easily use these documents to go and get the information you need for other things to be able to kind of streamline those efforts. But it also shows, where there's opportunities in your area for certain kinds of development. And then also, where you need to plan, like if you have an aging population, clearly that's going to inform, future land uses also. So it's, good for a lot of reasons to have a really in-depth social, and demographic section. So your housing element will look at location and quality of housing, quality of current housing, the age, availability and affordability. And again, availability, that land availability for development. If you don't have land zoned for residential, if you don't have it there, you can't develop it. So making sure that land is available, that's, one of the first steps, is it has to be available first before you can even consider, developing. Occupation status, meaning, are these rental homes? Are they homeowner, land or ownership tenure, basically. And the vacancy rates, you want, a healthy vacancy rate. And those will vary for different types of development. But if you have, minimal to no vacancy, that's clearly not good for your economy at all, or your housing. And then that will get into type and tenure and value to those valuations. Your economic element will look at industry and job distribution. It'll identify areas of economic development, look at policies and ways to coordinate that with your land use element. And it should look at regional economies and like the movement of goods and services and what that looks like for your community. And that's going to be different for all tribes in all areas. But there should be a strong kind of focus on that and what that looks like and how you can try to minimize remittance to the fullest extent possible. So you're not, payday, everyone's not leaving and spending all their money everywhere else and then they come home, right? Like, let's figure out how to keep that internal. But in order to do that, we need to know what's going on around us. So really giving a lot of thought to this process. Your natural resources and energy element, will be everything. Water, soils, your agricultural lands, vegetation systems, wildlife, watersheds, aquifers, coastal features, floodplains, traditional, like usually all of my plans all have like, traditional and subsistence foods will be included in the natural resources element. But then I also have like a separate section that is solely focused on traditional and subsistence foods and activities, but it's like incorporated throughout the document too, and like all of the areas. Not that it's just like one section of the plan. So again, that it just gets to like making sure that they're unique to you. Typically these will include conservation elements and then current and energy and future energy supplies. So those, in the first part of the session where we talked about the those future option values, future use values. The check in the bank, that's that. So really looking at that. And then your cultural and heritage element. So again, this is kind of, it's a standalone element, but at least, with me, I'd like to incorporate these elements throughout the plan. And how I achieve that is by working very, very closely with the community and the staff and the leaders to really truly understand how to incorporate this best. And then going back and forth through that process. Cemeteries, that's a huge thing, right? A lot of cemetery planning is important. I've noticed a lot since I worked with tribal communities. A lot of communities have run out or are running out of space in their current cemeteries, and they're trying to figure out where they want to put them. And that's a big decision for if you're in village, there's a lot of different aspects that go with that. So being able to come together to a consensus and saying, yeah, I'm okay with a new cemetery being here, and I'm okay with putting my family there, or I'm not. This process is a good opportunity to work through those conversations and to plan ahead for those lands. You're going to have, your utility services and facilities element, and that's going to include, all of your public facilities, and then, water, sanitary services, libraries, community facilities, all of that will be in that section. And then open space and recreational element. This is a big important element that should absolutely be included. And again, your guiding development, this is a mechanism to help you to make decisions and guide development. And it's also a mechanism that your tribal staff can use to justify funding requests. And these plans, they work to help ensure that decisions are made at the table that need to be made, and they help staff to get the resources they need to ensure that the community's vision and leadership's aims come to fruition. So these are very powerful if done right. That transportation element will include all of your modes of transportation, the circulation and patterns, and the infrastructure. And they should also identify areas outside of the reservation that are important for ingress and egress and future development. So again, kind of assessing that and incorporating it to the extent that you need to. This disaster mitigation element that will identify natural hazards, risks, and vulnerabilities. This photo is a picture of a tribe that I work with in Alaska. When we were doing their comprehensive plan, they were actually going through an emergency, a water and energy crisis, and these signs were kind of part of that process, came out of their emergency planning process that I did with them. But we incorporated all of this, into their land use plan. And it's an opportunity to kind of evaluate all of these issues. And then your mapping element, again, you have to have a formal map to be able to enforce your land use code and enforce your land use plan. It doesn't have to be a formally officially adopted zoning map, but it should be a formally adopted future land use map. So again, it's whatever you're comfortable with, and it doesn't have to be super complicated, or it can be complicated. So this is as an example of just a really simple land use map that works well. So it can be whatever you want it to be, and it should be what's going to best work for you. So your land use plan, future land use map, and official zoning map are typically adopted simultaneously as one motion or resolution, right? You're simultaneously adopting all three of them because they go together. They're really important. So you can adopt them separate. I do see them, like I said, I've seen a lot of different things but it doesn't work. It's hard, makes it very difficult. And then they can be adopted as advisory or binding. That, you just need to make sure that it's incorporated into the language of the resolution. And also in the plan, it should clearly state that, like in the beginning, always in my plans, I always discuss that and discuss what that means, right? So in the future, people that are reading that understand, oh, okay, that's, now I understand I need to go to council or the land commission to get an approval for whatever, but I don't need for this. So like, it just kind of helps people to understand where they're at. So incorporate a discussion of that in the actual text of the plan. The official zoning map are adopted as part of the zoning code and would need to be amended pursuant to tribal law. So yeah, so if you have an official zoning map, that is part of the text of your zoning code. So if you have to make an amendment to either one, that would trigger an amendment to the other. And again, you want to make it to where you're not having to get an amendment for everything, but also tight enough guardrails that the intent stays true to form for a long period of time. But flexible enough for when new administrations and things change that everyone's like cool with it, right? So it's not like thrown off to the side. And then the implementation of this. So land use plans and zoning are implemented through your tribal programs, through projects and related policy. So if you're doing it, right, and you're actively involved and you have active decision-making being done, this is going to be used very regularly, and you're going to be implementing it, daily, essentially, at all different levels of your government. So for the authority to zone in terms of tribal governments, what authority do you have to plan and zone? Well, you have the full authority to enforce all of your ownership rights, right? To exclude people from your lands, to zone trust lands, and to control the allocation of trust lands, and then to determine how those should be used. And obviously, to me, do it, because it's your lands. And if there's an issue, then you have to deal with it. But, you can't wait for other people to tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing. You have to just do it. It's your lands and go from there. But so anyway, you can, zone your, and to do that, to zone or plan, you can decide I'm going to do my entire reservation. You're going to do it by, band or village, traditional lands or sub areas. And again, that's like, all up to you how you want to do that. But you have, full authority to have these plans and to enforce them. And a lot of times, jurisdictions in terms of like counties and stuff, if you have checkerboard reservations, a lot of times they want you to have these, right? So they can just defer to you and just minimize that. And other times it depends on where you're at. The county's going to be a jerk and you have to deal with it. But, you have to have those plans in order to be able to even start to enforce something. So the benefit of land use controls and plans is this accountability, predictable land use patterns, and the planning process in and of itself is a huge benefit of a land use plan and a zoning code. In terms of accountability, these the regulations and the plans help you to mitigate ad hoc decisions, help you to ensure this kind of continuity across administrations. That tribe in Alaska that I told you about, they've had 5 different administration changes since I worked with them, and all of these plans have stayed intact. They keep developing more, and they're like on this path, but they still have changes, right? But they're like going in a direction together. So that's what these documents can help you do. They provide a basis for approving or denying development and helping you to stay accountable. In terms of land use patterns, they will help to ensure that you have these efficient land use patterns to maximize money and resources that go into these projects. And we know that predictability attracts solid development and investment, good stable development and investment. And then it promotes that economic growth. So again, as you're evaluating your lands, that's what you want, are beneficial relationships, between land and resources. The planning process itself is just so valuable. It bridges gaps in knowledge. It promotes economic growth and community well-being. It makes it easier to identify and approve needs, and it promotes informed decision-making. When I first started working with a new client in a community, they're like, who is this crazy white lady? Why is she here? It's like really kind of stand off. And it's not like a team. And by the end of it, you're working really well together. The community's working well together. And that whole process, is just so valuable for everyone. I've worked a lot with communities that, I've been in this community my whole life, and I've never sat across the table from that person. And at the end of the process, everyone may not friends, but there's a consensus, and you're going forward, and it's like, okay, we're on this track together. So you're able to control those land patterns in the way that you envision that for your future. So just the key takeaways. Again, lands can be classified by land cover or by land use. That goes into like that USGS classification system versus the land classification that we see more like in zoning. The key features of land use include free market land use, policy land use codes, and comprehensive land use plans. And then land use evaluation methods, which you'll probably use, or you should use all of these when you're evaluating land. That site analysis, photography, GIS, archival review, and legal surveys. So when you're doing, land evaluations, whether it's for a comprehensive land use plan or site development or whatever, those are all the things that you really need to be looking at. And then land use plans and regulations influence beneficial land use patterns by creating predictable land use patterns and enhancing accountability. So I think that predictability is also important, and that doesn't have to be everything zoned residential so it's predictable, but have your economic nodes, have what you need, but it's that predictability of knowing that you're going to make an investment in a home or in a business and not going to have a sand and gravel pit or a community landfill right next door. It's just having that predictability or that confidence to invest when you need to, and to promote that public health and safety component. So, and then this is just in the slides for who C Renewal is. I think that's it. Thank you guys. I'm so sorry about all of the dropping off. And you're right, OSTA, it was because I wasn't clicking on the screen. That's why I kept getting kicked off. So thank you for that.
You're completely okay, Amy. I just want to thank everyone, and I want to thank you too for just everyone's patience while we learn this new system together. It has been a process, just trying to learn everything. So I just want to thank everyone's patience. Let me go ahead and put Amy's email into the chat box if anybody would like to email her any questions. She is extremely helpful. I also went ahead and put the feedback link in there. If you guys would be if you could please go ahead and fill out the feedback form. Amy appreciates it more than anything. She loves hearing from you guys, knowing what you would like her to talk about next, or anything that she could touch up on. She's more than happy to do that. So please don't forget to fill out that feedback form.
Yes. Thank you guys very much. I do appreciate it. And yes, and please, your honest feedback so I know what to change. Thank you.
Of course. And I went ahead and added her presentation slides there too, so you guys can also have a copy of that. Don't forget, all of the materials mentioned in today's webinar are going to be in your courses section on the left-hand side, so please don't forget to check that out. Our next webinar is going to be effective pre-planning for grant applications with Diane Leonard. That's going to be January 23rd. Please don't forget to, I was going to say register. Please don't forget to join. You don't have to register. You only have to register once, and you're set for every single webinar. Show times are 2 p.m. EST, 1 p.m. CST, 12 p.m. MST, 11 a.m. PST, and 10 a.m. Alaska time. Don't forget, you can also access our webinar recordings on our YouTube channel. The link is right here. It's also, I posted in the chat box as well for easy access. You can access all of our recorded webinars here. Don't forget to check out our upcoming events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. You can also listen to our podcast, Hope a Thing in Native American Podcast, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Simplecast. Once again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I greatly appreciate your patience, and thank you, Amy, for a wonderful webinar. We will work out all the kinks in the future. Thank you guys so much.
Hi, thank you.